Welcome to the Latino Corporate Directors Association BoardWise virtual sessions. So we launched BoardWise as an opportunity for us to have meetings, conversations, and interaction on topics that are front and center in the boardroom. Today's panel is called The State of Latino Board Representation and the Roadmap Ahead. You know, the next couple of years will present the biggest opportunities to move the needle and change the corporate board landscape as a business advantage. This has been made possible by diversity announcements with Nasdaq. The Institutional Shareholder Services, ISS, is also looking at board composition and calling those companies that do not have any diversity on the boards, plus other key players and institutional investors that are making an impact. But the other area that is also driving some of this change has been the social activism to address systemic racism and exclusion that has been a spotlight and has spotlighted racial and ethnic compositions of the boardroom. You know, I want to take a moment to give my thoughts and heartfelt joy, but also sadness to the Floyd family, certainly for the loss of George Floyd. But with yesterday's conviction of the murder of George Floyd, again, our hearts pour out to the Floyd family, the community in Minneapolis and nationwide. This certainly impacts us all. We stand in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. Likewise, we call an end to hate crimes towards Pan-Asians. We also need to contend with the forgotten history of anti-Latino violence, including the recent awful massacre in El Paso where 23 people lost their lives and another 23 were injured in 2019. All of this is important to today's conversation. We're seeing traction from companies who certainly want to do better. They're focused and acknowledging the strong business case for diversity. Yet still, over 80% of Russell 3000 company board seats are white. And this means that boards are dangerously disconnected from the diverse marketplace. Likewise, companies are embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion, yet diversity without Latinos is not complete because we're 2 in 10 Americans, we contribute 25% of GDP, and 83% of new entrants to the workforce are Latino. So this is your growing customer and employee base and key stakeholder. With that, I'd like to give you a few protocols for today's session. We want to encourage you to maximize participation using the chat feature, contribute with any quotes you liked, part of the conversation. To be part of that conversation, you can use the chat feature at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Also questions, ask questions via the chat feature. We'll be taking a look at those throughout the session, and we will have a dedicated Q&A period at the end of the session. So we will recognize you or take your questions from the chat feature. So please, we ask attendees to mute your microphone until you're called upon to make a comment or ask a question. We have an exciting panel. I want to thank and acknowledge our tremendous partner, KPMG, and the KPMG Board Leadership Center. KPMG was one of our first biggest investors and really came in early to support our work. I think they really believed in what we were doing. And in those early days, really want to thank the pioneering roles of Jose, Rodriguez, Susan Angeli, and so many more. Today, we also work with Annalisa Barrett, who we'll be hearing from. And the support from KPMG comes at the highest levels from their board and CEO, including Anthony Castellano, who serves on the KPMG board. But what makes this partnership special is that they're all in, not only certainly supporting with their sponsorship, but volunteering on our board, working with us to produce fabulous panels and sessions, and contributing to the curriculum of the Board Ready Institute. So I could not say enough about the great partnership that we have. So let me turn over. We have two segments of this session. First, we're going to hear about the recent report between KPMG and LCDA and the research findings. So we'll hear first from Annalisa Barrett. She's Senior Advisor, KPMG Board Leadership Center, and LCDA's own Ozzy Gromada Mesa, Director of Membership and Research. Let's turn it over to them, and then we'll come back with the panel. Annalisa?
Thank you so much, Esther, and thank you to LCTA for having me today. It's been one of my actually great joys of my new role at KPMG is to have the opportunity to work with you, Esther, and with the LCDA team. So I'm very grateful for that opportunity over the last 2 years as I've been now with KPMG Board Leadership Center. And it's been our pleasure and our honor to work with you all on the research project for the second year in a row now to look at the representation of Latinos in Fortune 1000 boardrooms. And so if we can go ahead and start the slides, I can tell you all, I'm looking forward to sharing with you some of the findings of the recent research report that we released. Again, we looked at the representation among Fortune 1000 companies, and we looked at, for the most part, looked at the publicly held companies in the Fortune 1000 as of July 2020. And Ozzy will tell you more about the methodology in terms of determining Latino representation, but I'll give you some of the high-level findings in terms of where Latinos are serving on corporate boards among these largest US companies. So on the first slide, or the next slide, number 2, you can see that unfortunately, we're still in the circumstance where almost 3/4 of the Fortune 1000 companies do not yet have the benefit of Latino perspective in the boardroom. So we see that we're at 73% of the Fortune 1000 companies with no Latinos in the boardroom, and only 4% of the Fortune 1000 companies have more than one Latino in the boardroom. And as you all know, and you may be aware of research regarding being an only representative of an underrepresented group in any team setting, having more than one person from that group does lend more to the contributions that the group can make to deliberations in the boardroom. So there's a lot of opportunity there to improve. On the next slide, you can see that as is the case with most of the analyses that we do looking at board diversity and actually with corporate governance practices generally, the larger companies are moving ahead of smaller companies. So among Fortune 1000, we do see that there are more companies with Latinos in the boardroom, but we're still, at less than half of the Fortune 1000, at least we were as of July 2020. And so you can also see that the larger companies are more likely to have more than one Latino director as well. So, this trend, it's common to see that the larger companies move more quickly in terms of adding more diverse candidates to the boardroom, but But again, it portends to the opportunities that are there for smaller companies, especially even those below the Fortune 1000, looking at the Russell 3000 as well. And on the next slide, we can get a bit of a picture as to where the Latinos are serving in the boardroom. And in this case, on this slide, we can see an analysis by industry. You can see that the food and beverage and tobacco industry is the industry that has the highest percentage of companies with at least one Latino director. And we also can see at the other end of the spectrum that technology companies, surprisingly, are still lagging very far behind, with fewer than 15%, or just about 15% of the companies having at least one Latino in the boardroom, and industrial companies as well. And even for almost all of the industries, we see that less than a third of the companies have at least one Latino in the boardroom. One thing I wanted to mention too is that as we are discussing representation in the boardroom, it's also important to think about inclusion and ensuring that even, once Latinos are serving on the board, are they also included in leadership positions and in the work of the board as it relates to board committees. And so I wanted to share just a few statistics there, in that 17 companies of the Fortune 1000 have a Latino serving as chair of the board. And then, however, so unfortunately, that's a very low number, of course. But on the other hand, when it comes to committee service, most Latinos who are serving on boards are serving on at least one, if not two or three, of the key committees of the board. Most commonly, we find Latinos on the Nominating Governance Committee and the Audit Committee. On the next slide, we can look at state representation. And, actually, Esther mentioned the state laws that have been put in place. I sit here in California, and we have a requirement for diversity in the boardroom, both in regard to gender and in regard to racial and ethnic background and sexual orientation. However, as of July 2020, only 3% of the board seats of companies headquartered here in California were filled by Latinos. And that's in contrast to, almost 40% of the residents here in California being Latino. And we have a similar trend in Texas as well. And as you can see, the companies throughout the country, in those states where there are at least 25 Fortune 1000 companies headquartered, we see that the representation of Latinos in the boardroom lags the residential representation. One final note that I wanted to share, though, is that we do have some momentum, and I know Ozzy will be talking about that as well. Our 2019 study found that of all of the seats of Fortune 1000 boards, Latinos held 2.7%. This year, when we did the study, the 2020 data showed that we were up to 3.2%. So while the numbers are still rounding to 3, so the overall percentage, if we look at whole numbers, stayed the same, there is that half percentage increment that that we should definitely be thankful for, be proud of, and be, I think, attributed to the hard work done by LCDA. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Ozzy, the wonderful Ozzy, who can share some more initiatives that LCDA is working on.
Thank you, Annalisa. I love that introduction. So first of all, I would be remiss to thank you, Susan, and the KPMG team for the many years of support in bringing to life this data. And thank you for the highlights and the partnership. One of LCDA's pillars is to influence with data and original research as a vehicle to bring to light the state of Latino board representation. Through this commitment over the last 2 years, LCDA has advanced the conversation on key governance topics with pivotal research reports, including legislation in California, specifically the Gender Bill in AB 979, and the Race, Ethnic, Sexual Orientation Bill of SB 826. And each of these reports we have authored have created awareness never before surfaced. And for those familiar with this level of research, know that it's not an easy feat. Since companies are not required to disclose race and ethnicity of their board, organizations like LCDA have taken the lead to surface diverse talent. To take on this work, LCDA established a methodology to identify US Latinos on corporate boards. And this methodology was key in the development of the Latino representation report that Annalisa just highlighted. To start, LCDA's definition of a US Latino is defined by the US Census Bureau, stating a Hispanic Latino is a US citizen, a non-citizen national of the United States, or a lawful permanent resident of the United States who is Mexican, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Central, or South American, or other Spanish cultures or origins. I just literally said exactly how it is from their website. With the US Latino definition, along with additional diverse identifiers, including last name, affiliations, etc., listed in our methodology, which is available on our website and will be currently shared in the chat here, LCDA has not only been able to raise the profiles of leading Latinos and Latinas, but also, most importantly, raise awareness of the lack of Latino representation on public corporate boards, and more on that in a little bit. So in an effort to reach a broader audience and empower members, companies, and allies with data year-round, in 2020, LCDA developed an online research tool called the Latino Board Tracker. And Wendy, are we showcasing the slides? Sorry, there's a slide that goes, there we go. Thank you very much. The tracker is an interactive search tool tracking Latino representation on Fortune 1000 boards, with future plans to expand to the Russell 3000. The link to the tracker will be shared in the chat and is available on our website, which is updated on a quarterly basis. With the tool, you can search for companies with and without Latino representation and sort by fortune rank, city, state, and more. Our allies have found great success in the tool in a number of ways, including engaging companies without Latino representation to be a resource to them, reaching out and celebrating inclusive companies, and also searching by state and advancing the conversation with their peers locally. And due to the success of this Latino board tracker, LCDA developed an additional board tracker focused on measuring the effectiveness of SB 826 and AB 979. And this tool is available on our website. Next slide. Now we're going to dive into Latino representation and how we are faring, because that's a conversation we should be having. And that is a simple question to answer, as every single board composition report produced has told and continues to tell the same story. Among white, Caucasian, African-American, Asian, Latinos make up the least amount of seats on any index, including Russell 3000 and S&P 500. As well, Latinos make up the least amount of new appointments. And as they say, math has no opinion. As examples of a recent LCDA analysis of California board composition disclosed, and this is the first graphic on the left here, that Latinos make up 2.3% of the board seats of California boards, well behind Caucasians at 82.7%, Asians at 10%, and African Americans at 6.5%. There will be a new scorecard that will be released in the upcoming weeks, so I encourage you to take a look at that once that is released. As well as LCDA research partner Heidrick Struggles disclosed in their 2020 board monitor report that Latinos made up only 5% of the new board appointments on Fortune 500, once again, well behind Asians at 8% and African Americans at 10%. To summarize, Latinos are being left behind. Next slide. Wow. Now the question that we have to ask ourselves is, based on recent happenings and something that Annalisa mentioned, will Latinos see any sizable gains in corporate boards in the near future? And the answer still is maybe, but I want to share some inspiring news. We recently released a report that was highlighted by Bloomberg that showed a significant uptick in Q1 2021 placements of Latinos compared to the same time frame in the previous year. And this is a fourfold or a 330% increase from 19 seats in 2020 compared to 18 seats in Q1 2021. And these are appointments on Russell 3000 and microcap public companies. And while this has been the most significant uptick activity that we've experienced in one quarter, we are cautiously optimistic as Latinos have the widest gap to close. And when we segment the Q1 2020 board placements to those on Russell 2000 companies, and if we maintain this rate every quarter, this is where the cautious optimism comes in. We will, if we maintain this rate every quarter for the next 10 years, we'll still be less than 10% of the board seats on the Russell 3000. And with Latinos close to 20% of the US population today and projected to reach 25% in 10 years, there is significant ground to make up. One highlight before I transition to Esther is that one of the great, two of the great data points that we found is that 40% of the placements in Q1 2021 were first-time directors, as well as 41% of them were female directors. Next slide. And before I transition to Esther, I just wanted to highlight a number of organizations that appointed Latinos in this first quarter of 2021. So there are 2 pages of companies that we've highlighted. I'm hoping that it'll soon be 3, 4, 5. And at that, I'll transition it to Esther to discuss the roadmap ahead.
Thank you, Annalisa and Ozzy. That certainly sets a foundation and very new information for everyone. But let's get started with our conversation. I think one of what Ozzy's shown here is certainly what we built in terms of capabilities and products. I also am really proud to say that LCDA is growing. Our membership doubled just in the last couple of years, and we're excited about making sure that there is no excuse. We have ample supply to move the needle. Let me introduce our panelists. Our fearless leader as the chair of the Latino Corporate Directors Association Board of Directors. We have the Honorable Roel Campos. He's a director with regional management, and he is a former commissioner of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. We have Ralph de la Vega. Ralph is a director of Amdocs Limited, American Express Company, New York Life Insurance Company, and he's a former vice chair of AT&T. And our third panelist is Susan Angeli. Susan is senior advisor at the KPMG Board Leadership Center, and she serves on the board of the Latino Corporate Directors Education Foundation Board and serves as the chair of our programs committee. Let's welcome our panel and get right down to the questions, because we're going to focus on what's the framework and pathway ahead of us here. Let's start. This is going to be a conversation, so I asked all of our panelists to chime in, and at the same time, we want to hear conversation from the chat room as well. So let's get started. Even with recent gains that Ozzy reported, Latinos remain largely invisible in the boardroom. And I want to start with you, Ralph. I mean, I think everyone talks about the business case and why, diversity impacts the bottom line, diverse teams and diverse leadership, and certainly diverse boards. But you were at the front lines with AT&T, and it's sometimes helpful to ground this business case with real experiences. And tell us what you saw in terms of running some of AT&T's biggest operations in terms of diversity and why it matters.
Oh, of course, Esther, and it's a great pleasure to be here with a very distinguished panel. At AT&T, as vice chair and also former CEO of AT&T Mobility, I always worried at what are the big trends that are impacting our business, and how do we make sure we leverage those trends? If you look at the impact that Hispanics have had and are having in this country, it's a huge impact, right? We talked about the population growth going from 18% today, where we have 60 million, to as high as 29% by 2050. So if you ignore the impact that those segments have on your business, you're missing a huge market. You have to pay attention to segments that are growing, and not only are growing, but they're adding tremendous economic growth. You already highlighted the 25% portion of the GDP that Latinos are responsible for. And I'll give you another important statistic. In the last 10 years, about 63% of the net new home ownership gains have been by Latinos. So if you're looking for any business plan, and you will take into account the huge impact this segment is having, you're not going to be as successful in running your business. I was fortunate enough to recognize this early in my career. So when I was in charge of AT&T Mobility, one of the things that we did immediately was to put a Hispanic marketing team together. We have a Hispanic that led the effort. That person drove the way we distributed our products, the way we actually placed them, the distribution channels, and it made a huge difference. I can tell you that one of the key things that we did is that we built state-of-the-art retail stores in Hispanic neighborhoods. Prior to that, the industry had kind of neglected it and we built state-of-the-art stores. And I remember building one in Huntington Park near LA. It was so great that the mayor came out and actually gave me the key to the city. But that's not what really made it important in my book. What made it important is when we changed stores and we added bilingual collateral and bilingual personnel, my sales went up by 25%. Okay. And not only that, after a period of years, we went to #1 market share in the postpaid wireless market in the country. That drove tremendous value. And the lessons that we learned in the Hispanic market, then we took to the African American market and to the Asian market. And Esther, after several years, we were #1, not only in the Hispanic market, but the African American market and the Asian market in wireless postpaid service. So it really highlights that it is not just Hispanics, but any segment that you're trying to attract. The key is to have people from that segment lead the charge, not just have counting of heads, but making their heads count in taking their opinions in some cases in which you may not really agree with them. But the fact is that they know what they're talking about. And I can still remember many cases when I had somebody from one of those segments present a marketing plan to me. And I would say, I really don't like that plan. It's too aggressive. I said, well, Ralph, this is not at your age segment. This is for the younger segment. And so, sir, respectfully, you're not the target audience. And, I had to say, you're absolutely correct. I accepted their plan. So when I did, it was a huge success. So to me, what you can have when you add diversity and you have inclusion and you make people's head count, you get much better than you actually could be. Our company was a good company. Our business was doing great, but it was so much better when we had diversity and inclusion that I'm a lifelong believer in the process in every segment, whether it's in the front lines, leadership, or the board level.
Right on. Thank you for that. That's absolutely what we have to continue to remind everyone about is these very real life examples. And with that, I want to turn over to Roel. What started as a big push by institutional investors, pension funds to gain more traction on gender equity. Now, obviously, we're turning to more inclusion in the makeup of racial and ethnic diversity. Roel, you and your team at your law firm, Hughes Hubbard, drafted LCDA's comment letter in support of Nasdaq's diversity proposal. And first, we are indebted to you and the firm for making this contribution. But tell us, what was the biggest criticism of the Nasdaq proposal? What were your conclusions, and also why was this Nasdaq proposal important? Why does that matter?
Thank you, Esther. I hope you can hear me okay. Good. I'm seeing some heads nod. I always worry about my my equipment at home. First, I want to congratulate Esther, Ozzy, Kathy Munoz, the whole team on LCDA for having some demonstrable results here. Going from 19 to 82 or whatever exactly the number is, 4 times is a huge accomplishment. And, shamelessly, unapologetically, LCDA can take a lot of credit for changing the tenor, changing the conversation that's out there. I will get to the question you asked, but let me mention a few things that Ralph was talking about that I think are really important. You began with why have Hispanics, why have Latinos been invisible to corporate America? It's a good question, and I ask that myself every day to some extent. How can the largest minority, if we're even a minority, the largest group of people of color, Latinos in America, be so invisible, be so often forgotten and not talked about? I guess, some of it must be our own fault. Maybe we don't project ourselves. Maybe we don't have the social action programs that other groups do. There may be all of those things that are, at the root of all this. But what's happening, I think, is what Ralph just talked about, which is that, the old saying, action speaks louder than words, accomplishment speaks louder than, any demonstration that you might do. What's happening is the Latino contingent in America, we're talking about American Latinos who live in the US, most of whom were born here, are essential to the US economy. And today, investors care about whether Latinos are on boards. Why do they care? For the things that Ralph was saying. Ralph was in that unique situation where he naturally, understood the power of the Latino consumer, and it made total sense for him to go forward and seek that kind of clientele and customers. Well, that's not the usual case, but investors today want to see diversity on boards, and they want to see Latinos as part of it. Why? Is it because of political correctness? Do they just want to do, things that are right and moral? That might be part of it. But why they really are asking for that is that they want the bottom line to increase. They want to make more money. Okay? I mean, directors have fiduciary duties to investors, right? So for starters, if investors believe that having diversity on boards improves the bottom line, then that's what they want. And and I'm getting to the point that you were asking me about. Because investors want this, then boards, CGN committees have to be responsive, and they have to seek out broader diversity than what's occurred in the past. Okay. Now, you asked me about the Nasdaq proposal. Now, I don't want to bore the audience. As a lawyer, I can go into great detail about it. But essentially, the Nasdaq had a great idea because they realized that in their own investors, right, of the companies that they list on their exchange want to know about diversity. They came up with this proposal, which essentially has two things. One, they have an aspirational goal. They're not mandating or requiring that companies that are listed on the Nasdaq have 2 minorities or 2 members of a disadvantaged group. Instead, what they're asking for is an attempt to have 2 and an explanation as to what the progress is and what's going on, right? Why should people object to that? Some did. The other part of what they want is for companies to lay out in very specific detail what the composition is, what the background is of their members of their board. In other words, what their racial composition is, what their ethnic composition is, what gender All of this voluntarily, of course. If somebody for personal reasons doesn't want to disclose their ethnic background or their racial, they don't have to do it. To me, and to people who analyze it that I work with, this seemed very reasonable, going again to the reason that investors want this information because they believe they want to evaluate boards. If boards have diversity, then they're more likely to make money and to be successful. They're more likely to be aware of what's going on in the world, what their communities are doing. So they want that information. So it's a little bit like, I personally may feel that quarterly reports are a pain and don't really indicate where the company is going to end up at the end of the year. I'm entitled to have that view. But because investors want it and because the regulators require it, I don't really have an option. If I run a company like Ralph used to. So this is the way this works. Essentially my view is investors want it. Investors essentially are the boss. And what the Nasdaq is trying to do is reflect those needs. So you ask, why would people object? Well, I think what happens here, and Ralph would have some interesting insight in this, is that people feel the goalposts are changing. What it took to be a CEO 10 years ago, 5 years ago, is different today. You have more constituents. The Business Roundtable is telling you that you have to take all constituents into account. You have to take into account the employees. You have to take into account the creditors. You have to take into account the community. That's tough. That's a lot of work. And some people would rather just say, well, let's just stay with the business. Let's just get things done. But the reality is, in my view, right, and I think a lot of thoughtful people believe this, is that in fact what the business of business is all of that. It includes diversity. It includes having Latinos as part of that diversity. So I think there's a complaint that people don't want to change. People don't always put the same value. But I come back to essentially satisfying what investors want. If they want to see it, if you're a CEO, if you're a company, then you need to produce it. And one last point is that if you can't be measured, then you don't exist. And one of the biggest problems that Latinos have had, and perhaps another reason why we're invisible, is that we weren't obvious. It wasn't obvious that Latinos were serving on boards. And why is that? It's a very practical reason, right? I mean, the names don't always indicate Latinos. People can be married to a Latino. People can, they can acquire a name. They may be generations away. They don't believe they're Latinos anymore. So on and so forth. So this information is very crucial. And without it, a company, a board can't be judged. So this is another reason why I believe that the Nasdaq, and again, other people that I've consulted with believe that it's very important to have that information and to have it out there for all to see and all investors to see. And in the end, if a board doesn't believe in diversity, say so. That's all the Nasdaq required. Say why you think 10 white men, for example, don't need to diversify, and why you won't be subject to groupthink. And if you can make a good case, investors shouldn't punish you. So it's really that sort of thing. It's not no one's being forced. It's something investors want, and that's what the Nasdaq proposal ended up doing, in my estimation.
Thank you, Roel. And there is pending legislation in the House of Representatives and the Senate that would require public companies to report as part of their SEC filings the racial, ethnic, and military veteran composition of the board based on a voluntary basis. And I think the SEC is considering some of these actions as well, which would take an even faster route. So that's extremely important. And one of the criticisms of the Nasdaq proposal by many, and we heard this from Nasdaq and others, was that while there aren't enough qualified Latinos and Blacks and others to fill these roles, and clearly, we're setting out to ensure that they know where to find Latino candidates. But let me turn to Susan. Susan, you're a member of our foundation board, and you work closely with our team and the Board Ready Institute, and looking at candidates who are interested in joining our executive membership. This is where we work with executives who are aspiring directors. So tell us what you're seeing in terms of the pool of applicants and candidates that come through LCDA.
Sure. And first, let me just echo what others have said. It's absolutely delightful to be here. And you know, as you said, Esther, we've been with LCDA from almost the beginning, and it is just so gratifying to see the growth and the leadership and the progress that's been made. So it's really been exciting to be a part of this journey and to continue to be it. So, you know, kind of picking up where Roel left off, which is if you don't have diversity on your board, then you should tell people. And, you know, there could be two reasons. One, you don't care, or the other is you think you can't find the right person. I mean, I am here to say, if you can't find the right person, you're not looking hard enough. Because particularly with the executive membership, the pool of talented Latinos and Latinas is just off the charts phenomenal. So just to give you a little bit of sense of the background of what the executive committee membership is, and for those of you who are executive members, you may have been through the Board Ready Institute, which we refer to as BRI. I'll give a little sense of that too. The committee of LCDEF meets a few times a year, and we look at executive member candidates. It's quite selective. They're vetted by two different search firms. Most of them are recommended by a member of LCDA or someone in the Latino community at a board level who knows the person. And the riches that we see are just extraordinary. The membership on the executive membership side has grown and continues to grow, and just keeps getting better and better. So C-suite members, high-level government members, entrepreneurs, people from every walk of life in terms of skill sets, technology, marketing, strategy, finance, really anything you could want. And so personally, I don't believe that a board won't be able to find a Latino board member. But so the one challenge that first-time board members do have is it is a risk for a board to take on someone who's never been on a board before. And so that's really what the group is really about trying to address. And we do it in three ways. One is through education. Just, you know, really kind of going through what do boards do. We have mock board meetings. We discuss how boards think about things in a different way than management thinks about things. And by the time people have been through that, any possibility that they don't really get the difference between management and a board is a complete non-issue. Then the next thing is, okay, so much of board work is networking. How do you do that? And that's the other piece of what BRI does, is really Esther, Carmen, others on the team have worked so hard to bring in connections, bringing in private equity firms for breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, connecting with nom-gov chairs and others, search firms and others in the board world to bring visibility to these aspiring board members. And then the third is one-on-one mentoring. So everyone who wants to take advantage of it has the opportunity to have numerous conversations with experienced board members before they go into their first board interview, and to have ongoing conversations so that by the time, so they're visible, they know what boards are all about, and by the time they get into that board interview and then into the boardroom itself, they really have, not only the wonderful executive experience that they've spent their lives pulling together, but also they are comfortable in that boardroom and know how to behave and operate and present themselves as board members.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, this is absolutely a very comprehensive approach and program, and you spot on. The key goals are, again, to build that incredible pipeline to get ready for your board journey and ready for board service. So let's get into the topic of, again, an honest conversation about actions and a roadmap ahead. What's missing, what's next. We're very engaged in California. We've seen that Apple brought on a Latino appointment, so did Chipotle. So we're, challenging others to do even more. So, Roel, in terms of LCDA's membership, but for both Roel and Ralph and the entire panel, there's obviously key influencers for the board space, including search firms, the nom-gov committees. And what do you think, what are your recommendations for this search and selection process? We were also getting similar question in the boardroom in terms of different ideas. Ralph wrote an article about increasing board, with ideas like increasing board size and other things. But let's start there. Let's start with Ralph to kind of give us what are some low-hanging fruit that boards can do, and how can they change their mindset to be creative in this space?
Thank you, Esther. And I want to leverage what Susan just said. Is what I have found serving on several boards is that from the company's point of view, they say that I can't find the candidates, qualified candidates. And the candidate said, here I am, why can't you see me? So we don't have a connection, but I totally agree with Susan. In my experience, the candidates are absolutely there. Make no mistake about it. So how do we get them together? I'm going to relay back to that chat question, the things that we have done in the boards that I serve on. And by the way, we just added 4 directors in those boards in the last 60 days. 3 of those are ethnic minorities and half of them are women. So how did we do this? One of the first things we did is one of those companies was struggling trying to find qualified candidates. So we hired another search firm. We were using one firm. We weren't getting the candidates that we wanted. So we went to another search firm. That firm immediately brought us 2 candidates that were so good that the board said, we're going to increase the board size right now because we want to add those 2 people on board. Okay. And it was done. Everybody agreed. In fact, when we saw those 2 candidates that somewhere were missing by the search firms that we were using, we wanted to get them, and we bypassed everybody having to sign off on it. We said, these are so good, we cannot let somebody else have them. And so we brought them on board, and that's the kind of action that I think you need to take. The other things that I think are really important is if you have openings in the future, take into account those openings now. And like I said, when you find somebody good, don't wait around because they may not be available. So that's from the board side. From the search firm, I think they need to do some work as well. because just in the case of this one firm, they kept giving us the same candidates or lack thereof. It's like if you go fishing in a pond and there's no fish and you keep fishing in that same pond. It's crazy. Go to a different pond where there's plenty of fish. And in this community or that community, you can find candidates. So just keep looking in different areas. And by the way, LCDA is a great place. If you can't find qualified Hispanic candidates, call Esther and she'll give you a complete list of extremely qualified people. In fact, maybe we can call it 1-800-ESTHER. Just if you have a question about Latino diversity, call 1-800-ESTHER and she's going to put a candidate in your door tomorrow. They're that good. So I think we need to do that from the search firm point of view. From the search firm point of view, you have to make sure that they don't set arbitrary filters that keep qualified candidates out. And that is extremely important, because if you set the criteria that you have to be a former CEO or a former COO or a board member, that immediately narrows down the funnel. And it makes no sense if you're really truly interested in making your company perform better because of the things that we have said that diversity works. Why would you put those arbitrary filters in? Now, sometimes you need expertise from a certain part of an industry. You may need expertise in the financial services side, or you may need expertise on the technical side, and that's okay. But when you start narrowing it too much, then you end up with lack of candidates. And so I think that's the key. From the point of view of the candidates themselves, I think you need to make sure that you're using services like the ones that LCDA is offering you. You don't have to be a board member to join. My gosh, you can get access to all their services and you can get ready, like Susan was saying. So when your turn comes up, you have a great shot at getting the board seat. Whether it's LCDA or board prospects or some other networking, social networking tool, I would say you need to make sure that your qualities are known. And most of all, don't give up. Do not give up, because I think the opportunities will come. The trends that the Hispanic segment is bringing to this country makes that segment inextricably linked to the future of this country. And it will continue to play a bigger and bigger role. And you will not be able to be ignored by those companies who want to be successful in this future marketplace.
Roel or Susan, you
up on that, and yeah, just add to that, and it responds to something that came in on the chat about are we seeing boards consider term limits? The answer is no, but what the investors are pushing for, which we haven't seen enough of, but we are starting to see in the best boards, is really serious evaluations and linking the composition of the board to the needs of the company. So Ralph, you were talking about the importance of the Latino perspective to the economy, to the consumer base. And if a board doesn't have someone who has that perspective, they should be doing a very serious evaluation and saying, why not? And how are we going to keep up with our business needs if we don't? And then having very difficult conversations with someone who may be a wonderful person, but has less relevant skills than they did when they joined the board, 10, 15 or more years ago. And those intense evaluations and linkage to strategy is really what the investors are looking for, and what boards are being pressured to do more and more.
Yeah, and Susan, also what I have seen personally is when we add a new member and that member is a younger member, the perspective they make is immediate to the board, because when you get to a certain homogeneity, you have blind spots. And it's so great to see a board and a young person get in there and all of a sudden they raise a question. You go, oh my God, she's absolutely right. We had a blind spot here, but you know what? We no longer have that. And to the extent you can add more diversity, like somebody said before, you can't just check the box with having one. If you have multiple points of view, I think it makes you a better organization and a more effective one.
Esther, let me just say a few things.
Yes.
I totally agree with all this. First of all, the lack of talent is a red herring. It's a ruse. It doesn't exist. If anybody uses that, they, as Ralph said, I think it's Susan said as well, they're not really serious. They're not looking. I think a couple of things. Some boards are having age limits, so you hit 72, 75, that goes, it depends on the board, it depends on, the makeup. So some of that is happening. It may not be fast enough for young people who want to get on a board, but there is turnover that's occurring. Boards are increasing sizes, for the reasons Ralph said. They see good candidates. It is a cost for a company. Each director costs X amount of money, right? Their stipend, their expenses, and so forth. So the company has to be able to afford having a larger board. Not a problem, of course, with the big companies and the AT&Ts and so forth. From the perspective of people who are not on boards, that's probably where you're having the most questions, and I can understand that it's not straightforward. There's no, if you do 1, 2, and 3, you're going to get on a board, right? There's no particular formula. So I'll just throw out several things that are not guarantees, but I've seen them work for others. One, essentially, send a letter. Figure out what you're strong in, right? I have strengths in this area, in this particular industry. Write a board, write a CGN, chair, and say, I'd like to be a candidate, for a director, and here's why I think it is. Okay, the odds maybe are low, but you never know. And if you can get on the list of candidates for the next opening and get an interview, that's a big deal. 2, do that for friends of yours who are qualified. There's nothing more impressive than someone recommending someone else that's not seeking their own benefit, right? And boards and others who see those letters have a way of being impressed and perhaps will reach back out. Yes, do what Susan and Ralph said. Get training, get that on your background. If you haven't been on a board before, there's lots of opportunities. Some of them don't pay much or pay anything at all, nonprofits. Look at your network. If you're in business, and I presume that, most of you are, who are interested in boards, then certainly your friends or part of your network has started companies. Ask them to be on their boards. It could be an independent company, it can be a small company, but you're on a board, and you can have more influence on a small company that's independent, that's not a public company, than you can often in a very large company. So all of these are good items that help you, build your resume. Ultimately, your network is your biggest asset. People you talk to, people, let them know you want to be on a board. Maybe they can help you and come up with reasons. But keep building, keep increasing your talent, your skills, and some board will find you, when you get presented. The other thing that I've seen others do is you write to some of these recruiters, who do particular board searches, and tell them, look, I think I'm qualified. You should know about me. I want you on. I'd like to, show you how good I am, and let's have a discussion on the phone. Maybe they add you to this. That's another way that I've seen others make progress.
So,
well, I wanted to add, let me just at one point, because I think I wanted just to make sure I share this with everybody. What Roel just said about joining a board, even a nonprofit one, is really important. My first board was a junior achievement board, and I rose to be the chairman of Junior Achievement Worldwide, which teaches kids about entrepreneurship in over 100 countries. Do you think I made a few contacts and I had capability to network with other executives around the world when I joined JA at that time? And I was a low-level executive at AT&T when I started, by the way. So do not kid yourself. What Roel just gave you was a great piece of advice. You can join a nonprofit board, get experience, and you're going to have great networking capabilities, because typically charities have all the icons in a community, help them if they are successful. So look for a nonprofit board, join, get experience.
So along these same lines, companies have a lot more risk and issues that they deal with. In fact, board members today have more work, more hours to stay up on all of the different issues, from the corporate culture to cybersecurity to their employees, and certainly the bottom line. Speaking of the bottom line, is you lead with your skill set. So the skill set plus that network is very important. But let's hear from our panel in terms of what you're seeing in terms of the amount of work that people need to be prepared for this, as well as what your thoughts are in terms of what NomGov committees can do.
Well, look, Esther, I can tell you that board work these days is hard work. Do not go into it thinking it's going to be a breeze. I'm the chairman of the audit committee at American Express, and I'm the former chairman of the audit committee at New York Life. And if you ever had those two jobs, you realize it's a full-time effort to be focused on the financials, on the audit processes. And it's just, do not go into this if you're not fully committed to spend the time necessary. Do not do it just to put a box on your resume. You need to do it because you have an interest in being a professional at it, and being a professional at it today requires a lot of work and a lot of collaboration with your fellow directors, because companies today are facing the biggest challenges I've ever seen in my career. And those issues are issues that when they rise for a company, I don't care how good a company it is, you're going to have issues. You have to buckle up. You have to, have more frequent board meetings and calls until that issue is solved. So do not take it lightly. Take it seriously, very seriously.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really important. So let's also take a look at questions and who wants to ask questions. I'm going to ask Wendy to help out here in terms of who she's seeing is I'm seeing questions also certainly coming in here on the chat feature, but we also are happy to recognize anybody for this Q&A portion. One of the questions has been around, what is the appetite? Do you have to have a previous board experience? And I will just, one little statistic from what Ozzy presented, what we're seeing in the new trend is that 40% of the new appointments that were made in this last quarter were first-time directors, and 41% were Latinas. So there's been an uptick in Latinas in that respect. But on that particular question, see if anybody's interested in also weighing in.
I think it gets back to this question of, particularly a public company board is expecting that a board member is going to be there 10, maybe 15 years. And it's a small group. They want to have a comfort level. There are people who are extraordinary executives, but just can't be board members because they manage everything too much. And it's a very collaborative environment. And so, I wouldn't say you have to have board experience, obviously, because no one is born with board experience, but from every NomGov chair that I've spoken to who's brought in a first-time director, there's always been something that makes them feel, okay, this person is going to understand it. So whether it's that you've spent a lot of time with your own company's board, or, as Ralph and Roel said, nonprofit boards, those can be tremendous training grounds. But there has to be something, and it needs to be brought out. So remember, a board resume looks nothing like your executive resume. And if you sort of go through your background and say, you know, what are those things that's going to give someone a comfort level to say, I know how to be a board member and I'm going to be able to make that transition. I think that's really the key.
Yeah, it's
Susan, I was going to say that's a really great point. I just wanted to highlight that the aspect of you thinking that I've got a great resume when you get to the board is good, but it's not the determining factor. The question is the experience you have at executive levels high enough to be able to have you mix with your board members? You have to make sure in your career that you take on meaningful, meaty assignments, difficult ones, so that when you get to the board, it doesn't matter your education or your GPA. What matters is what executive experience do you bring to the board? What kind of things can you, when there's a discussion about labor issues or financial issues, can you weigh in? Or are you strictly a cybersecurity expert? Because that's an important topic, but that's not the only topic you're going to get selected for a board. In fact, I would say if you're a cybersecurity expert, you probably get hired by the board or the company to solve a cybersecurity issue, but you won't be on the board, because what the board looks for is expertise in various areas. So together they can collaborate and give the company the guidance and oversight that is needed.
Yeah, as everyone has said, I think you have to realize, and this is what I tell people that I advise or ask me for advice, you know, all one or two of them, that you have to bring something of value to the board, and you have to think about it that way. What am I bringing, you know, that the board either doesn't have or needs more of, right? And it's rare that it's just one skill. It has to do with experience. It has to do with judgment. It has to do with how to run a business and where you can contribute. So all of these things, you know, are there and difficult to describe. People know it when they see it, you know. And your job, if it's a first-time board, is you're trying to convey that you have that mix, and that you know, and this is why it takes an interview, that you have the personality to participate well with a group, you know, make your points, but not in a way that's destructive, right? Or that's arrogant, or things that make others uncomfortable. You know, you can be in life, you know, and if you're going to be successful in business, you learn quickly how you can be firm, how you can be assertive, but not personal in terms of any remarks you make that when you have a disagreement. So the same thing applies to a board, you know, and from that perspective. So I think that's what's going on. On the last issue about first time, I think it's less of an issue now. Ralph sort of touched it. You know, because so many boards need technical expertise, or you're interested in going on digital. You know, if you're a financial company, you got to be on the internet. You got to be able to do underwriting on digitally and so forth. You need young people often who, you know, and if you can bring in a young person who also has been a senior person at a tech company or at a, you know, has had tech experience, and then you overlook that they haven't been on a board before, or at least you might. You know, and I've been a CGN chair. I believe in a very strong, very thorough indoctrination, bringing new directors to a place where they can be contributing very quickly. So they have to learn some parts of the business, you know, who matters, you know, who makes decisions, how decisions are made, and all those things are important. So, you know, a good introductory transition program to a board can be very helpful.
I'm seeing some questions here. First, it's worth reiterating and repeating that, and we always tell our executives and people interested in the board, 90% of the time, you're going to get on your first board through people who know you in your network and others that you know are on boards. What we do with the Board Ready Institute is also give you the toolkits to put together a board bio, practice your pitch, practice some smart questions that you want to have in a conversation with your colleagues, so that once, if they get called for a board, they said, oh, I just had a really smart conversation with Luis Demetrio, and you should talk to him. So, you know, certainly it's a lot of, they're not going to come to you. You want to certainly make those rounds. And in terms of this question regarding the California demographics, you know, we had 39% of the population there is Latino, and 2.3% of those board seats are held by Latinos. We found that of the board appointments in California, 57% of them were from people in California, and 40% were first-time directors. So we're seeing that trend as well. By the way, in terms of questions regarding Board Ready Institute, we have a whole website with key questions and how to look into that. But I had also a question from Carmen Heredia Lopez, and this is a little different track here in terms of strategy, but what does the panel think about proposals to link executive pay to ESG integrations and a push for to be linked to increasing diversity? Does anybody have a comment on that?
I'll say very quickly that I've always believed in that. When I was at the SEC, we had very few Latinos in the senior staff positions. These are the permanent positions, and they're substantial. And I asked that we put a very small box along with the 3 other boxes that were already in everybody's evaluation, and put on there, you know, a grade for supporting diversity efforts. That was a big fight. It was very interesting how people resisted, and so you know, I eventually got it through, and you know, it became part of the culture over time. It wasn't straightforward. I think executives, as you can expect, are very competitive people, and so anything that has to do with their evaluation, their bonus that year, is looked at very carefully, and some undoubtedly will be threatened by it. But I think if you have a strong board, and if the board feels that this will improve the culture of the company, and improve the tone at the top, and improve lots of things that are maybe immeasurable, but eventually affect the bottom line positively, then you can impose that. Some people are not in a position to make much of a difference, right? So this goes to supervisors and people who have hiring authority, but it's being done, not as much as probably some of us would like, but it's out there, and I myself have pushed for it on the companies that I've been on.
And super quick, just to add to that, and people chime in. Somebody asked, so what are the percentage of board searches that are filled by search firms? And it's actually around 35%. And it's really a lot of the bigger companies that would hire the search firm. So that means that the majority of the searches are through people's networks, and that's why getting out there and talking to folks is so important. But anyways, Ralph, you were going to chime in.
I was going to say to Royal's comment concerning ESG, et cetera, I serve as the chairman of the compensation committee for one of the companies whose board I serve on. And I'm pleased to tell you that the last board meeting and the last meeting that we had on compensation, we talked about ESG, and we talked specifically about pay parity, and the company has put in place a process that is auditable to look at what we're doing in pay equity and make sure that there's pay equity between specifically genders and ethnicities, and I'm really pleased with the open-minded approach that the CEO and its leadership have approached that issue. They know it's a big issue, so it is being talked about, and it probably will get done, like Roel said, a little bit over time, because every company is different. But I can tell you this it's a top-of-mind issue these days.
Well,
and let me just add quickly to that. So just two things. One is I agree with you, and the institutional investors are not only looking at board diversity, but they are very much looking at these issues of pay equity and diversity, equity, and inclusion deep into the organization. I just want to also add on, Esther, to the comment that you made about the search firms, which is, even if a search firm is used, networking is what can get you over to the top or potentially derail you. Because what happens is, search firm will have a list of names. Sometimes those names are provided by board members or other people in the board ecosystem, and the search firm is just used as, sort of a way to vet these people. But even if the name comes from the search firm, the first question everyone is going to ask around that board table is, does anyone know this person, or does anyone know someone who knows this person? And your brand and your reputation and your network is going to be all important, whether a search firm is involved or not.
And certainly we are hearing because the LCDA network is made up of some of the most respected and accomplished leaders in business, that this brand and being associated with it too helps to say, oh, well, they're LCDA certified, and of course we work with all the search firms as well. Wow, it's amazing how lots of great questions, and we are committed to following up with the individuals that had questions to continue the conversation, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Just super quickly, for the last few seconds here, a lightning round question for each of the panelists. Tell me in 2 words, what describes how you're feeling in terms of the current corporate board landscape and the prospects for Latinos?
Okay, I'll give it a shot. I'll give you 2 quick words. Number 1, encouraged by the results going from 19 to 82. I'm encouraged, but at the same time, I'm more committed than ever to make sure that what we're doing, working with organizations like LCDA, result in sustainable, just like we have seen in the first quarter results. We want sustainable progress.
Nice.
So I'll go next and give Roel the last word. And it's actually very similar. So my first word is optimistic. I think we really are at an inflection point, and the windows and the doors are open, and it's a matter of really going through them. And then eager, along with LCDA to continue the work and to expand on it.
Thank you. Roel?
I guess I'll be the glasses half empty guy. So I'll say not there. We have a long way to go. As encouraging as those 80 numbers were in the first quarter, and Ozzy's statistic that it would take, that in 10 years, what did you say, 20 years of that kind of production will still only get us 30%? My goodness. Something, really exponential has to happen, so we have a lot of work to do in spite of all this, in spite of, the truly great progress. We have so much more to do.
Well, with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us. Your participation is so important, and certainly the panel and your insights and KPMG's partnership. Thank you so much. I'm going to remind folks that there is a survey that we'll send to you right after the session. We want to hear your input, and still, if you have any questions for us, we're happy to follow up with you. We have some next research publications we're doing. So we're very active, by the way, in LinkedIn, where we have even more up-to-date information for folks. So tune in there for latest and greatest. And our next Board Smart session is also coming up. We will have the CEO of Kaiser Permanente in May, and we'll make more details available to everyone. Thank you y buenas noches.